Welcome, everyone, to Kabbalah for Heretics with me, Yakov Leib HaKohain. We're studying, as we have been for over 20 years now, every weekday morning, the complete volumes of the Zohar, volume by volume, cover to cover, page by page, etc., and have finished over this period of time during these broadcasts, uh, volumes 1, 2, and 3. We're almost finished with volume 4, and we'll begin with volume 5 when we finish. As you know, we record these programs every morning, 7 days a week, and you're invited to the recording session if you'd like to interact with me at the end of the broadcast. But don't be surprised if you come here and you're about the only other person here beside the sound technician who's doing the recording. Um, but it's good to have you. If you do come, Tommy, it's good to see you. Good to see you. Let me unred dot you. Now don't blow it for everyone. The big surprise, Tommy, is that these are no longer classes. These are programs, broadcasts on YouTube. That's what we're doing now. Much larger reach and so forth. But welcome, Tommy. Good to see you. Want to say anything before we get started? Isn't that a great? I mean, we're very excited about going national, really, with YouTube. We'll continue having the posts of the broadcasts on um, Facebook, but now, in addition to that, there will be the regular daily programs, Kabbalah for Heretics. And we love having you here. Hope you keep coming. If not, you can always listen on YouTube. And the value of that is that every one of these programs on YouTube will be archived by them and in perpetuity be available to listen to. David, did you want to say something before we get all right? Oh, thank you, Tommy. I've seen your wonderful response to them on Facebook. Thank you. Thank you. It's good to see you. Well, come as often as you can in the mornings. Uh, it's always good to have an audience, even a small audience, during these recording sessions. Let's get back into the Zohar, where we left off in yesterday's program. We're in volume 4, as I've said, really 90% finished. That doesn't mean to say we're going to be finished in the next week or month, or maybe not even a year. It's very slow going, but we're getting close to finishing volume 4 and entering into volume 5. The Zohar has been discussing this complex issue of evil and sin, both of which are absolutely persona arena. We don't want to think about the sin and evil. We're thought to be very regressive and so forth if we do. But the fact of the matter is the Zohar speaks of it in great length, and I think with great validity. It's not moral sin and moral evil that's being discussed. It's not the church sin and the church evil. It's spiritual evil and spiritual sin against each other and the world. I mean, you cannot deny that there is great evil in the world. Look at the way we're murdering each other in the Middle East and elsewhere. That's evil. Anyway, the Zohar speaks of it in great detail, and it is speaking of it in terms of the sacrifice that was made in the temple on the altar. Speaking of that, both literally and virtually, we have to remember that although it's talking about the sacrifices that were indeed, in reality, made on the altar of the temple, it's also using that as a paradigm and a metaphor for how we are to perform those sacrifices internally. We left off with the Zohar revealing the mysteries of the written passage in his oblations, if his oblations be a sacrifice of peace offerings. There are various kinds of offerings that were made in the temple, one of which is called the peace offering. Rabbi Yehuda discoursed here on the verse, "And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters." And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, in order to break open the scripture, if his oblation be a sacrifice of peace offerings. And it goes on. When God created the world, he said, he created 7 firmaments above, and in each one stars and constellations and ministers to serve, and chariots, one above the other, to take upon themselves the yoke of the kingship of their master. Now let's look at that. There are so many implied teachings here that we never think about. First of all, it takes very seriously astrology. And there are whole passages in the Oral Torah where astrology is praised and discussed and described. It is not an accident that most of the great Kabbalists were also very adept astrologers. The Arizal, for example, developed a whole school of astrology that was used among the Kabbalists. This is absolutely in contradiction to what the Christians say, that is in the Bible. It is not forbidden. Astrology is not forbidden in the Bible. Necromancy and consorting with the dead is forbidden and punishable by death, but not astrology, not palm reading, not the use of oracles. Those are not forbidden in the Torah. In fact, in the great work, Derech Hashem, of Oral Torah, there is an entire chapter devoted to astrology. This comes as a great surprise to many people, but here it is. God created 7 firmaments above, and in each one stars and constellations and ministers to serve, and chariots one above the other to take upon themselves the yoke of the kingship of their master. These stars and firmaments carried the yoke of their master. That is, they are open to astrological interpretation because they are the master. Another point here is that there is more than one world. That's what's being said here. And of course, this does fit very closely with some modern thinking, especially with the ancient astronaut theory, which, although we do not advocate, we see some interesting merit in. And we've talked about that in the past. But here, it's making the point that God created 7 firmaments above, and in each one stars and constellations, and chariots one above the other, to take upon themselves the yoke of the kingship of the master. Now it's going to describe the Merkaba experience, the Merkaba. Some have 6 wings, some 4 wings, some have 4 faces, some 2 faces, and some 1 face. Some are of fire, some of water, and some of air. These are the creatures in each of the planets and firmaments. This is exactly what is assumed to be so by some scientists and many ancient astronaut theorists, that each planet, as it were, has occupants that are entirely different looking than us. If you remember uh, the Star Trek films and so forth, there were those scenes in the bars where there are all these strange looking individuals, some with two faces, some with one face, and so forth, just as described here in the Zohar. So what the Zohar is doing is telling us there are other life forms out there, and they look, depending upon where they come from, different than us. And it describes what they look like. Some have 6 wings, some 4 wings, some have 4 faces, some 2 faces, and some 1 face. Some are of fire, some of water, and some of air. The firmaments envelop one another like the skins of an onion, and every firmament trembles from the fear of its master, by whose command it moves or stops. Now let's get down to the esoteric meaning of all this. This is describing what one can actually see in what the Zohar calls the heart mind, in the heart mind of imagination, which is not just making it up. It is how we know God. The Zohar says, God indeed is unknowable, but God can be known at the gates of imagination, to the degree that one can imagine in the heart mind. That is how God is known. This really touches upon visions and so forth that one experiences usually with one's eyes closed. And it's describing them as they've been had by the authors of the Zohar. There were men who set down the Zohar, and they are describing in various places what it is they experienced in the inner world and how it is they got there for us to use to get there too also. We talk about the mirror that shines and the mirror that does not shine. The Zohar does. The mirror that shines is what we see with the eyes closed. The mirror that does not shine is what we see with the eyes opened. With the eyes closed, we see on the inside surface of our closed eyelids colors and forms flashing and moving, all of which are coming from the higher world of the brain, and they're being projected out onto the inner surface of the eyelids. If we watch carefully, they take form, the kinds of forms that are being discussed here. The reason that we don't see them when we open our eyes is because they're now in an environment of light that kind of blots them out. But they're there. They're being projected. They're out there all around us. One of the values of the isolation tank, some of you may know about it, the 60s and 70s, the isolation tank, was that in that perfect darkness, and I mean perfect darkness, one could open one's eyes and still see what was being seen with one's eyes closed, because it was perfect darkness, and it was no longer being interrupted by the closed eyelids, but going out into the environment, where one could see it. I've frequently described my own experience in the isolation tank of this very thing. First time that I used the isolation tank, you have to remember now, the isolation tank is totally isolated. All bodily stimuli and oral stimuli and hearing stimuli, all stimuli are cut off in the isolation tank. One is floating in water. There is no sound, no light, no physical sensation. Totally, totally isolated and cut off from all outer stimuli. And there I was, the first time, waiting to have a vision and doing what I thought needed to be done to have it. I'm chanting Om, 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 and doing all kinds of things that, of course, one shouldn't do in there. One should just shut the hell up, as I finally did, and just experience what was going on. I finally did, with my eyes closed. And suddenly I realized, oh my golly, I see as clear as life with my eyes closed an ancient brass key ring with ancient brass keys on it. I think there were maybe like 3 or 4. And I'm just looking at it. There it is. It's being reflected on the inside surface of my closed eyelids. But I'm seeing it, and I think to myself, I wonder what will happen if I open my eyelids. And I opened my eyelids, and I still saw those keys. Now, that vision of light that was coming from the higher self, as it were, was no longer being interrupted by my closed eyelids, but going out into the darkness around me. And because it was perfect darkness, it wasn't blotting out the fine light that was causing that vision to occur. How many of you are following me here in the listening audience? Tommy, are you following? Good, good. That's good. All right. So that's what's being described here. The various planets, if you will, the various worlds, if you will, and the different inhabitants of all of them, all of which were experienced by the sages of the Zohar in their own inner work, as I've just been describing it to you. How do I know that? How do we know that? Because that's what they describe in the other volumes of the Zohar. They describe it. They tell us what they did and how to do it and what to expect. That's what the Zohar is. The Zohar is not a work of religion as such. It is shockingly absent of any references to the religion of Judaism. One of the things that we object to so strongly among the religious teachers of the Zohar, the rabbis, is that they interpret everything in the Zohar from the context of the Jewish religion. And the Zohar is very specific. That is absolutely not to be done. The Zohar says, woe to those who do that, for they shall have no share in the world to come. The Zohar is to be looked upon for its esoteric meaning. The firmaments, it says, envelop one another like the skins of an onion, and every firmament trembles from the fear of its master, by whose command it moves or stops. This is as if one of the great sages were sitting there with his eyes closed, doing the kind of meditation I just described, with the mirror that shines, and conveying verbally to his disciple next to him what he is seeing, and that disciple is writing it down. Over all is the Holy One, blessed be he, who sustains all in his power and might. Similarly, there are 7 earths below, one higher than the other, the land of Israel being the highest of all, highest point in the whole inhabited world. It's speaking here of the 7 lower sephiros. There are 10 sephiros, but the 7 lower sephiros are the worlds. The 3 upper sephiros, Keter, Chachma, and Binah, are the realm of Atzilus, from which emerges all of these worlds and all of these phenomena. Saying there are 7 different worlds. One of them is Israel. Israel is not just a piece of land. We're not talking about the political nation now. It's talking about that land of Israel. It is a land. It is in itself a planet. Within it is a planet within that planet. Jerusalem is called in the oral Torah and in Kabbalah the neck of the world. The neck of the world. It is the connection point between this world below and that world above. Anyone who has ever visited Yerushalayim knows that the minute you step off that plane, something grabs hold of you that you had not expected. It's a whole state of mind, a whole state of consciousness that is well documented by the Israelis and causes some people to behave very strangely. And it comes upon Gentiles as well as Jews, one higher than the other, the land of Israel being the highest of all, and Jerusalem being the highest point in the whole inhabited world. So when you go to the land of Israel, you are actually stepping into a whole new planet created by God for special reasons. It is the highest of the planets that are being described here. Now I want to point out that hence they all have separate names, all these different planets. Among them being one, the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was a separate planet and remains such. It's not a place on the planet Earth. Nowhere does it say, and God created the Garden of Eden on the planet Earth. It just says he created it. And the Zohar is telling us it was one of 7 planets. The Garden of Eden, just as Israel is a separate planet, so too the Garden of Eden is a separate planet, virtually and probably literally, a separate planet in that that is what we can envision and be gifted by seeing if we follow the kinds of teachings that the Zohar is teaching us about visualization and meditation and the act of imagination. I might point out that it is not just the Zohar that talks about these multi-planets in the universes inhabited by different creatures. Hinduism speaks of exactly the same thing. They are called lokas, and each one has its own ruler. This is saying. And Mormonism, by the way, teaches the same thing, that there are other planets, each one of which has its own ruler and its own Messiah. And each of us is, according to them, in training to be the Messiah of another planet. Very much what's being spoken of here in the Zohar. Possibly Mormonism and Hinduism get that belief from the oral Torah of the Zohar, because the oral Torah of the Zohar is more ancient than the Hindu teachings and certainly the Christian Mormon teachings. By tradition, these teachings of the Zohar were passed on orally from the beginning of creation and finally were set down in writing about 300 AD. But they existed before they were set down in writing, orally. And it was from this influence orally that very possibly the Hindu concept of lokas and the Mormon concept of other planets emerges. We know that Joseph Smith was deeply influenced by Kabbalah. There are very profound students of Mormonism who really delve into the Kabbalistic influences on Mormonism through Joseph Smith. Again, and I'll just allude to this briefly, this has to do with the passages of Genesis, I believe it's Genesis 24 or 25, where it speaks of the sons of Keturah. Abraham had other sons beside Isaac and Jacob. He had other sons, and he had them with his other wife, Keturah. It says it right there in the Bible. late in Genesis. It says, and Abraham had other sons by Keturah, and to them he gave gifts and sent them eastward to the east country. The oral Torah says, what does this mean? And it answers, it means the gifts that Abraham gave to those sons of Keturah were the occult, esoteric meanings of the Torah and the occult names of God. And he sent them with those eastward to India. And along the way, they planted these teachings in various locations. For example, in Midian, you remember Midian? Jethro was the high priest of Midian. It was he from whom Moses learned the name of God. And it was Jethro's ancestor, one of the sons of Keturah, who stopped on the way to India in Midian to transmit these teachings and the names of God to those who had come after him, principally Jethro. But other sons continued on, stopping in other places to build what the Zohar calls a nest, to plant these esoteric teachings that were given to Abraham. We'll stop here and continue, of course, with this tomorrow morning in our broadcast tomorrow morning. And until then, Sophie is being, they really know, oh man, Teddy, what's wrong? They really know when the class is, when the program is over. God bless you. All right, David. Thank you for being here this morning. Please, God, be here tomorrow morning, and we'll see you then, and we'll continue with another broadcast tomorrow morning of Kabbalah for Heretics. See you then, everyone.